Hello and welcome to another episode of the ABC Music Talk podcast. In this show, we'll be talking about what happens to individuals working for companies when a change of ownership occurs. This, therefore, fits neatly into the lifestyle category of this podcast, as this is the sort of thing that no one really prepares you for and is often not talked about as much, and how it affects those involved. This, of course, is no better way of doing this than talking to someone who was on the inside while some of the most significant and seismic changes that the music industry has gone through in the past 20 years occurred. In particular, for this episode, the merger of Sony and BMG and the build-up to Universal buying EMI. And that person and guest of this show is Jan Mehlhose. Welcome to the show.
Hey Alex, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our interview.
Yeah, no, it's. I hope it's going to be fun. So you actually have a couple of firsts that are for my podcast. So, but you're the very first phone interview I've ever done. So I hope the technology doesn't let us down. You're also the first foreign national on the show. And you're also, we're relative strangers to each other, and I think that's worth just talking about very briefly.
Yes.
So neither of us can actually remember how we got in contact with each other. So that potentially was over a beer at some point, or a conference or something like that. But we kind of refound ourselves through LinkedIn, which is of course a wonderful way of staying in touch with people. And what was interesting in particular was that you started your podcast at roughly the same time as I started mine. Although I think like twins argue about the, I'm 3 seconds older than you or something. Like you're 22 days older than me in terms of podcast origin. So well done. All right. So in fact, as I just talked about the podcast, let's talk about yours. So you've got a podcast called The Business Artist, and I will put a link to your show in the show notes. But you can just search The Business Artist on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. And it's a really interesting concept and kind of really spoke to me. I'm a failed musician, but a businessman. And therefore, the two things are sort of, connected that way. And also I've started my own company to, I suppose, release some of my artistic or my creative, feelings and aspects about my life. And of course started, the podcast that I started, I guess, is a sort of a product of me being a business artist. So when I came across your podcast, it really stood out to me, really kind of connected with, how I feel about, my life right now. So thank you for doing it. I think it's fantastic. And just for those at home, it's focused on entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's mainly focused on people who are entrepreneurs or who want to become entrepreneurs. Because I think you have to be a business artist to be an entrepreneur, and the business artist really means that your art is business. So you like an artist, thinks about his or her art. Maybe it's music or it's painting. Or it's architecture. Business is also an art. Even Andy Warhol said this. And you can do business in a very artful way if you do it in a way that you express yourself, and you do it in a way that you create something new to the world. If you also do it from a point of view that you want to do something beautiful, I think you can do business as an artist as well. And I needed a long time. I always had this fight in me if I'm an artist or a businessman, until I found out that my art is business. And that's what I want to, give to people and teach people. That you can do business this way, and I think it's a very successful way to do business, and also a very fulfilling way.
And I guess you arrived at this through some of your experiences, which is kind of what I want to get into. I mean, it sounds like you had a health issue as well, which we don't necessarily need to talk about, but it's up to you. It's up to you. But yes, I mean, so kind of what's your origin story? How did you kind of get into the music business and and all the rest of it?
Yes. So in 1991, when I was 16, the techno scene started to really evolve, or maybe before, but that's when I got to know it. And we started to go in clubs, and the whole city where I lived were on techno music. And yeah, so our heroes were the DJs and the live acts at this time, like the Prodigy, for example, Carl Cox, but also German DJs like Tanit, Westbam. And we wanted to do the same. So we DJ'd or we also produced music. And actually, I was rather, when we've been in the studio, I rather had like ideas, but we had like a band, like you could say a techno band. So our idols were like the Prodigy. And we, with friends together, we produced music on Amiga or like really low quality in the beginning. And we wanted to perform on events. And that's when we had the first problem because nobody wanted to book us. Nobody knew us. And then we just said, okay, we have to do our own event. And we just started and found out, oh, you have to pay for location. You have to pay for the DJs. Then we looked for people who could give us money, and all of a sudden we had an event with big DJs and art and live acts, and we performed on this event. And then I thought on this evening, I thought, wow, that's my life. And so I really was already in the business kind of because I was organizing everything and driving it and having the ideas business-wise for it. And then on the second or third event, we met PCP, which was like a legendary techno act in Germany, and they heard us and signed us to their label. And maybe only 2-3 months later, Sony Music picked up this. So Sony Music, like you, was the first introduction to major labels. They picked up one of our records, and we had a meeting in Frankfurt. They've been in Frankfurt at that time, and they. I met the A&R and I thought, wow, that's what I want to do. I want to become an A&R. And then actually I went to London a year later or something and just knocked on the door of every record company. And there was at Berwick Street, close to Sony Music was then in the Soho in London, a small division of BMG called Logic Records with only 3 people working there. And after I got 20 or 30 no's, they all said, okay, you can start working here. And I was also like doing, packages, putting post stamps on the packages like you did. And just maybe a month later, a new boss came in and he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, A&R. So he gave me a big box of tapes at this time, and I listened to them. And so I since then I've been A&R, and funny enough, I worked with an artist then called Zant, Tzant. I don't know if he's successful or known anymore today, but the producer Jamie White I think is quite successful in many different projects. And we had a track A&R with him together called Sounds of Wickedness, and it was number 11 in the UK charts.
Yeah, I remember.
Oh, you remember that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I already had then the first hit, and then maybe another year later, BMG Germany asked me to come to their headquarters and to start a label there. And I started the hip hop label, which was very successful after 3 years. It was a hard, tough time, but after 3 years, it was really successful. And we were the biggest hip hop label in Germany. But then the change started very much to hit us. So although you signed successful artists and you've been top on the charts, sales went down. And that's when I became really interested in the digital aspect of it, because I said, okay, today, if you want to change it, you have to change the structure, because CD sales won't be big anymore in a couple of years. Yeah, so then I researched a lot, and also I think I was 28 years old, and I reported directly to the president, who was something like a celebrity, not as big, but like Simon Cowell or something, who also was a celebrity and voice off shows. So it was a lot of pressure for me, I think, with 28. I couldn't really enjoy it so much anymore. I was even kind of afraid of success. So when the next single just went again to the top, and I was stressed by it in a way, which was strange. So I thought I needed a change. And then I overgave the label during a phase of 1 year to the company. And I used actually the Sony BMG change, because then also Sony bought as first 50% of BMG in the first step, and so
it was a merger, wasn't it, in the first instance? Yeah.
Exactly. exactly. And I used it to basically overgive the label. And so said to the new CEO, well, I have the idea, can we not merge my label with a rock label? And then we talked to the heads of the rock label, and they said, yes, okay, that's fine. It's both indie. So I used it to find a solution to keep the label alive, but put myself out of it, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So that until the first change of ownership. That's the story until there.
Yeah, no, okay, very good. So I recently interviewed somebody called Eamon Ford about his book, The Final Days of EMI, Selling the Pig. But you were actually there. I mean, it's sort of the Guy Hands and Terra Firma time. I mean, I guess you lived through that as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, and then you were head of marketing for GSA.
Yes.
EMI, right? And
Yes.
But you also and then also living through the the Sony and BMG. So you were A&R, right? So you went from A&R to marketing, right? Okay.
Yes. Well, that's I tell you the story about that quickly.
Sure.
So after I then left BMG, so I was totally A&R person, 100%, and then I left the company. And I studied in Australia actually and went surfing. And during my MBA, I did an MBA there. And every project I could do, I did it in digital music. And but still, I wasn't sure what I should do. I mean, it was still not Spotify time, or maybe no. I think Pandora was existing, but Spotify didn't exist. So I even thought about launching my own Spotify, but I didn't know how to do it because it wasn't programmer or so.
I think most people had an idea of launching their own music service at some point. I know I did.
But then how to do it, that's another game. But yeah, of course. Yes, of course. So I wasn't sure what to do, what my next step was. But then maybe because of the lack of a better vision, I thought, okay, why did you come into the business? Because you've wanted to be an artist. So then I really said, okay, now you do it. And I recorded my own album, which was spoken word music on spoken word on music, basically. And I was influenced by France because I then married my wife, and we lived in France for a short time after Australia. And that's where I got to know the artist Grand Corps Malade, who was huge in France. I think he's still huge, and he made the spoken word on music. I really loved it, and I thought, oh, I bring this to Germany.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I released my album, and also because I had such a good track record, Universal gave me a label deal and picked up the album, put a lot of money in it, and it turned out, it was a total disaster. Nobody bought it. Nobody wrote about it. People weren't interested in spoken word or music in Germany, and also not in the style which I did, because German spoken word or poetry slam is very funny, and I did it rather like poetic. And the poetry slam scene, they didn't like me either, because I just came in and said, hey, I'm doing the first ever poetry slam label, and here I am out of nothing in the poetry scene. And obviously it was an existing scene which lived and was organic, and so they didn't like it. So it wasn't fun. It wasn't successful. As an entrepreneur, I started my own label. The first time, which I really owned, it was also a disaster. So it was kind of a crisis for me the first time. And that's when I really thought, okay, you're not an artist. You're not an artist. You're a businessman. So, but I had to work again, of course, because money ran out as well at some point. And then I started as a marketing director at EMI, and then I really, said, no, I'm absolutely 100% business. I don't want to even when artists came, I wasn't so I worked Robbie Williams, David Guetta directly, but even there I really stayed away. I didn't involve myself so much. Before I slept with the artists at their homes, I went to holidays with them. I went in the evening. They always called me 10 o'clock or whatever. But this time I really, didn't engage myself at all, and only concentrated on the numbers, on running the business, optimization, really like this. And I think it worked in the whole concept. Did a good job. I think it was a backbone for many. But I always felt like I was living in a box, and like I couldn't feel my life in a way. But that's the stage I've been in at EMI, and when the merger, when the company was bought. So all the time when we've been at EMI, there was talks of somebody buying it. And then there was a big, the last hurrah maybe was like the head of publishing EMI came in, and he had like a big vision to merge publishing and recorded music and made it one big company together and keep it alive and don't sell it. But in the end, it's sold separately, not together. And recorded music was bought by Universal Music. And in the end, it was totally, basically nothing really stayed out of EMI, only the artists and maybe the logo on some things. But that was it. EMI, as it was then, is dead today.
So I mean, so when did you know things were first going to change? Like either during the JV or the acquisition, either company. I mean, like were there things that you kind of spotted happening at the organisation? Because presumably you weren't in the acquisition talks or in the merger talks, because yeah. So but like as a as a sort of foot soldier, as many of us are in these big organisations, kind of did you start to get a feeling that things were starting to change around you?
So, like, I think it was kind of similar to the Sony BMG. Most of the time in the beginning, it's the announcement. Then everybody's afraid, everybody's uncertain. Then you hear the voices from top management. No, everything is fine. Nothing will change. And then nothing changes for 1 year or something.
Yeah.
Or half a year, or 1 year. And then what I've noticed as well now when I work with many clients, where I also seen those takeovers again. So what's happening then is top management and maybe key employees get like a package to stay. So when that's all sorted out, and then also maybe they want to get rid of certain people, that's also sorted out, then changes happen.
Right.
And then you see like the implementation of changes, and but it's a lot of rumors all the time. That's worse probably is in this phase is the suffering because of things that could happen and because of uncertainty.
So is that a lack of information, do you think, that you're kind of getting from management at that point, and it's creating sort of paranoia, which creates these rumors, or rumors create paranoia? Either way, is it information? Is it communication, do you think?
Well, the question is, how can it be done better? Because they are not allowed to talk about it. Often maybe they don't even know yet. I mean, top management probably doesn't know either, but the decision makers maybe do their plans and get McKinsey's in to do the recommendations. And in this phase, obviously, there's no communication. And even, I with one takeover I've recently seen, they do it really well. I mean, they put in apps for where the employees can communicate and ask questions. They have one app where they can ask even the CEO of the global company, and they answer the questions.
Really?
And
okay, this is interesting. Okay, so can you talk about which company this is, or would you rather not? It's fine if you don't.
Fortunately, I cannot, but it's in the gaming. It's gaming.
Okay, so different industry.
A different industry, yeah. It's gaming, but I've never seen takeover done so well, although it will end up the big company 100% overtaking the small one, and the whole culture of the big company is going to be, infused in the employees of the old company. Yeah. It's like Sony, like EMI and Universal, nothing will stay of EMI, and now nothing will stay of the old company. And they manage it really well with those apps and communication, but still, I mean, the uncertainty is there. People are leaving. People are thinking, or rather look for a new job than waiting here. What will happen with me? It's really tough.
Yeah, I mean, so I have sort of questions around all of those kind of different things. So let's start with like your experiences. So I mean, how did your sort of day-to-day start to get affected? Like, kind of what were the things that started to change, or was it not really like that? It was kind of, there was a singular day where everything changed.
Yeah. No, the day-to-day stuff it stays really long the same. I mean, like, for example, in music marketing, even in the very end phases, when there was absolutely uncertainty and nobody knew who to report to anymore, there was still budgets available to do videos, to do marketing campaigns, to do rollout of campaigns. So that really, that was the last thing that stopped, because it's the operational business kind of keeps the same. But anything of long-term planning or mid-term planning, then you always, you don't get answers anymore, or it's next week. So it's really tough to make plans. But the rollout of operational activities, that's really, it's like if you're on the boat and nothing, no communication anymore, you don't know where you're going, you're still, paddling. Paddling is.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating, sort of a period of change, I think, for everybody. So what were the most difficult challenges you faced? I mean, obviously you just sort of talked a little bit about that sort of lack of ability to get answers for strategic questions that you might have. Was it just that, or was it because you were, I don't know, losing members of your team, or kind of some of the other things?
I think one problem is emotionally, is that you build up stuff. For example, I built up at EMI dance music as almost like an own division within EMI. So with David Guetta, and we had Deadmau5 and other artists. So we built that up like almost a label within EMI, with staff and branding for dance music. And, that this, which everybody was aware of at EMI, but it wasn't like somewhere really written on paper or so. So it didn't, for Universal, it just didn't exist.
Right.
That was an emotionally really hard to deal with. It's almost the worst, I think, when you build up something and then it's just taken away because it doesn't make sense for the new owner, and maybe they don't even understand it, or maybe you don't even get the chance to tell them that it's there. I think for me, that was the worst, and that's why I'm actually went in the process then to Tidal as well.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'd like to talk about Tidal as well. I have perhaps some questions about that at the end. I mean, was any part of it fun? I mean, did it feel rejuvenating, the idea of big change happening and being part of something new, and you start seeing some different new stuff come into the company, or was it, or were your experiences very specifically not like that? I mean, either way, because I think that the two things can happen. When my own personal experience, or at least what I've heard from the change from the company that I used to run, Ingrooves, internationally, and they recently got bought by Universal. And I know from talking to some of the people that I used to work with there, some were excited and some were kind of full of fear. So, how are your? Because you had two experiences. Were they both the same? Were they both just kind of fearful, or were they? Oh, this could be quite fun. This could be good. This could be beneficial to some of the things that I want to achieve in my career.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I mean, it always depends on which position you are at the first label, and then. Yeah. I mean, if you are talented, and I mean, all of the people were scared at EMI, but today all of them have great jobs,
Right.
So the music industry is not a big industry, and there are not so many experienced people. So I think if you have this skill, you will always get a new job. And normally, I think there's no reason to be scared, normally. But you might go through an uncomfortable phase.
Right.
That's what you have to go through. And it could be that you don't want to continue. I just didn't want to continue. I wasn't looking for something forward for Universal, but maybe if Spotify would have bought EMI, let's say,
right,
just for to make the argument, I would have looked forward to it big time.
Right.
Definitely would have been amazing for me. So I think it can definitely be thrilling to have a new owner. It just depends what they bring on board. But EMI was such a they've been in Cologne in Germany, and Cologne is a very special city with a special charisma, and so the company was just different. There were so many people working there, not me, but I only worked there for 3 years, but other people for 24 years, for 38 years, for 7 years. So for them, it was such a big change. But I'm sure today they will all say, well, it was great that we did it.
Interesting. Okay, so these days you're an advisor to various individuals and companies. So thinking about this sort of change of ownership, like do you have any sort of like tips, suggestions, or like a sort of a playbook for companies, so therefore executives that might be approaching the idea of acquiring another company or doing a merger? Like what would you tell them, like from the point of view, I suppose, of one being an advisor but also somebody who's lived through it? So like what are the things to look for and what are the things to kind of take care of?
Yes. So I think what I just mentioned, to provide these platforms for communication is extremely important. Give the people the chance to ask questions on them. I mean, you have stuff like, there are even platforms today existing. I can't remember the names, but something like Slack for change management or for change phase for employee transparency is existing. So use those platforms, use the existing technology to make the change as swift as possible for the people. But I don't think that's enough. So what I think ultimately, why are people scared of changes? Because they think, how does it affect me? So I think what would be really important is to, as soon as possible, show the people their opportunities in the new structure. And so from an ownership perspective or from a decision maker perspective, they should have the goal to be very quick in finding out how the new company should look at, what kind of staff do they need, what kind of skill set do they need, which staff do they need to make redundant. If they have to, they should try not to, but if they have to, and then who they want to keep, and then let them know as soon as possible, both of them. Right. And maybe with enough lead time for the ones they have to make redundant. I think that will be the biggest factor to come back to, to make the employees confident. Because what I've also noticed in those changes, every time also performance drivers left the company. It's not that only the weak leave. There are some who might think they have great chance, but also some performance drivers, like really great people leaving the company.
Yeah, well, of course, and they're often the ones that are able to go and get that new gig because they're well known in the business and probably been turning down job opportunities, right? Yes, no, absolutely. And of course, when you start to see some of those superstars leave, that is another factor on the others that are left, because they're there sometimes in part because there is some luminary executive that they admire, right, and they want to work with them. I've heard those stories before about various people, certainly like big major record companies, and and a lot of the staff kind of follow them around, depending on where they go with their gigs. It can be very sort of destructive to sort of company culture, can't it, when you start to break apart those teams? Mm-hmm. So same sort of question, I guess, as from the point of view as an advisor, but kind of the other side of it. What are the things not to do? I guess you sort of slightly covered it there, right? But was there anything that really sort of stood out other than the kind of lack of communication or not being upfront with people, or the speed perhaps with which people are making these changes or making these decisions? Is there anything in particular that stood out?
Yeah, so what I've noticed is from the company who was bought, and it was clear to everybody that that it will be taken over completely by the new company. There's still some leadership persons who can't give up their influence, their power, and also their drive to make people work. So one thing which also just created a lot of frustration with staff, and everybody knew it's over, that there were leadership people who drove them to work like 10 hours a day, to give everything for the company, to use all their passion for the project. In the end, nobody could believe it anymore. So I think from the company who's bought, I think a sense of reality is also important. So sometimes it's always good to motivate. It's always good to show people the positive side, but also it's important to acknowledge the suffering of the people, acknowledge the frustrations of the people, and realize that's real. Yeah. It's not something they make up. So that's one advice I would give. And from the company who's buying, I think it's extremely important to not come in as the bully.
Right.
So, to tell to themselves, it's important that they know why are they buying the company. Is it maybe that something the company has which we do not have? And if that's the case, tell this to the company, tell this to the staff. Yeah. We buying you because you are big in digital, we are not. We want to learn from you.
Right.
Yeah, so that's, I think, is something very important. And so not to do is to come in, okay, here we now, that's how we play the game. Everything you did until today is not important anymore. Do it the way we say now. That's what they shouldn't do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think some of that strategic vision of the reason why a transaction is taking place is often not communicated. I mean, sometimes you get a kind of an overarching, this is going to be great because we're going to be bigger, or we're going to be in more business verticals or whatever, and you're going to be able to take advantage of this new company's prowess in whatever it is that they specialize in, and therefore it's related, and therefore you can use it. But yeah, certainly. So because it's an interesting, one of the other things you just talked about there, like the idea of sort of telling people, whether or not they're still to be, employed or not, right? And because of course, I think the reason why companies don't announce too much around that is because they know what's going to happen. If you say, yeah, we're going to make some significant changes and there's going to be some job losses, and people do immediately start looking for new jobs, right? And it just completely. They lose control at that point. So you can sort of understand why these executives don't do it. But so that's why I was kind of curious about, what's a really good way of kind of looking after the welfare and the mental health of the staff, right, that are going to be affected by this. Because in an ideal world, you would just sort of tell them at the earliest opportunity that you need to go and look for work. I don't know necessarily what the right answer is, other than actually, it's one of my favourite films. This is a bit of a guilty pleasure. It's Up in the Air with George Clooney, and it's about this guy that flies around the world letting people go, and this they have this sort of like playbook that they go through, and they sort of pull out the brochure, and it's like think about this is an opportunity for you. Your next journey in life. Goodness, and I, certainly I don't know. I don't know if I've seen a lot of that kind of sort of. Aid in planning for somebody's next step, right? That kind of very sort of, it is going to happen, but we're going to help you through it. And I personally, I've been in difficult situations where I've really had to kind of fight for proper packages on the way out, should we call them, right? Because it's often not in the original employment contract that you're going to get looked after on the way out to give you, those sort of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, maybe a year's worth of, money to kind of get yourself settled again and get yourself off and running. But yeah, I wonder if, that there could be more done in that sort of area, so you could be upfront and say, look, guys, there are going to be some changes, there's going to be some job losses, but don't worry, we're going to look after people. No one's going to be left on the street and go hungry and all the rest of it. Because it's sort of like, at least, I don't know how you feel about this, but that sort of like very basic human survival level really kicks in. Because most people in the music industry, aren't, either from money or have money, right? They're working because they need money to live, and food costs money, rent costs money, etc. And I think people immediately start to go, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get through the next day? And so, I wonder if companies could do a better job of kind of supporting them on that and making that part of the business transaction, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, from the outset.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you that it's so difficult to do, but I also agree with you that it's extremely important to cover this aspect because, as you say, most people do not come from money. Some have kids, and they need every salary because they might have even mortgages to pay. So yeah, I can't agree more. And it's very important. And that's in the end of the day what the people are worried about, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I had a very bizarre experience with there was a company that I was involved with, a digital distribution company, and it got acquired by actually no, this was like, so first of all, got acquired by an American telco, not actually a telco, but a business involved in the telecommunications business, and they kind of like ran it for a while, didn't really know what they were doing, and then they wanted to sell it, and so when it became like the sell through, I was running a team of about 15 people, both in the States and in the UK, and at one point, going through this process, they approached me and they said, "Good news, Alex, we've got you some money, so you're going to be okay." And I was like, okay, what about everyone else? And these are people that are, not literally, but bled for me. They'd been my team. I'd hired every single individual myself. They turned up. We got on well. We hung out socially, and they went, "Oh no, it's just for you." And I was like, okay. And I said, "Can I split this up? Can I give this to some of the people? Because I know that you're going to ask them to stay through the transition." And they sort of looked at me as if to say, "Why on earth would you do that?" And I was like, there's no way I could have slept well at night knowing that I'd got paid off and no one else had, given that, a lot of the time it's the other people doing the actual work. I was a manager, right? And so I never told any of them that I did that, and I still see a lot of them now. And I've always felt really good about that, like that. And I was 28 at the time, so I didn't have any money, right? It's like, I don't know, like and I just think a much better way of doing that would have been to create a better formal structure around, looking after all these people, right? There was something about it that just sat really awkwardly with me, and I wished the company had been a bit more kind of proactive rather than leaving it to me to figure out. But yeah, anyway, yeah, just a thought. All right, so you mentioned Tidal earlier. Yeah. So I actually know that company as a Spiro and Wimp, right? Mm-hmm. So, I've been doing this so long that I remember the original names of these companies that have been acquired over time. But of course, these days, most people know it as Tidal. So I did just changing tack ever so slightly, if that's all right, if we've got time. I know we're slightly tight today. I did an episode in my podcast called The Remote Worker. And this is sort of one of those things that I think, because I've always been the quote unquote the international guy, right? So that always means that I'm never in the HQ, right? So I'm always the remote worker, and as a consequence, everything that I kind of create around me, staff and different offices, they are also satellite offices, right? So I just wondered if you could just riff real quick on kind of your experiences, because presumably being in Germany, you weren't in Norway, and therefore you weren't in the HQ or wherever the HQ was. I don't know if it was stayed in Norway, or did it get moved to the States, or?
No, it was still in Norway when I was there, but I'm just thinking if I ever worked in the headquarters. So I think at BMG, I mean, the headquarters were in New York. The real headquarters were in New York, and at EMI they were in London, and in Tidal they were in Norway. And I think I never worked in the headquarters. Always worked at the satellite, but I mean, it was still an office at Tidal. We've been, or at Aspiro or Wimp at that time, I think we've been 5 people.
Right,
in Berlin. So it wasn't as remote as I'm today. It was a small, nice office in a cool area in Berlin, right.
Kreuzberg, of course, where everybody is. So and in the episode, I talked about some of the challenges that people go through in terms of like being, distant time zone, but also geographic, perhaps a language barrier. I just wondered if you kind of have any sort of like memories from that, and perhaps some tips for my, so because I don't know if I explained, but my audience is people that are just kind of coming into the music industry, or have only just started, or are thinking about getting into it. So it's more about sort of things for them to sort of learn from people that have kind of been through it and lived through it.
Yeah. So I think first of all, it's great to work remotely. I think you have more freedom, you have more ownership of your own time, you have less politics. if you do it from home, then the only thing you have to maybe make your mind up about is your social life, because good thing in the headquarters is you meet people, you have friends, you see people every day. But today you have this co-work. So I think co-working is a great thing if you want to be, under people. So that's something which I can only recommend. If you have the chance to work remote, at least try it out. I like it. The other thing is, because you talked about headquarters and different mentalities. So I think it's what I didn't know when I started is really think about the country where your company comes from, you work for, because it's really different. If you work for an American company, if you work for a Scandinavian company, for an English company, for a German company, it's totally different. The culture is totally different, and you feel it. Even if you live in your own country, you feel the difference. For example, these are stereotypes, but definitely the Scandinavians are so flat. They don't see a lot of hierarchies. You don't see like, oh, you do that now at all. You wonder sometimes why these companies are successful, because you think, who's taking decisions here?
Right.
They ask everybody in the end. They still ask, I don't know, the lady who brings the coffee what she thinks, and how do they take decisions? And then also at 2:00 in the evening, the CFO can come in and say, okay, I go now pick up my kids. And you say, oh, well, yeah, that's happening here. And in a German company, if you go at 7, people look at you, already going today,
right.
half day today. And there you have clear hierarchies in the US as well.
They have that funny thing about holidays. They don't seem to take them very often in America. Whereas the Brits, it's part of our when you're employment law, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so many differences, and obviously the English, the French, for example, you can never speak directly to them, speak anything direct. The Americans always go direct. Israelis even more. So everybody is so different, and the companies are so different. So think about it and maybe inform yourself a little bit about the company culture if it fits to you. I think that's a big recommendation, but it's also interesting to work for different companies, from different cultures.
I'm really glad that you covered all of that. That was actually one of the parts of the episode that I didn't cover in particular. I didn't think I could articulate it very well, but you just did perfectly there. So thank you so much for that. So I know that we're slightly tight on time, so we're about to hit 45 minutes, which I think is a pretty good length for a podcast, for at least ones that I listen to anyway. So thank you very much, Jan. I really appreciate your time. It's been awesome to have you on the show. So listeners at home, do check out Jan's podcast. It's called The Business Artist. I'll put a link in the show notes. But thank you for listening. And as ever, I welcome all feedback, comments, and suggestions for future shows. My Twitter handle is @AlexBranson, and if you want to message me directly, just put podcast DM and I'll follow you back. Or alternatively, go to my website www.abcmusic.co, and you'll find a contacts page on there with my email address. So thank you once again. Take care.